Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Hidden History with Frank Strickland. The year was 1863. A new queen was born on the Ohio River, a majestic sidewheel steamboat, 260 feet long, a true marvel of engineering for her time. She was built of wood in Cincinnati, Ohio, her twin paddle wheels driven by 4 innovative fire tube boilers that could generate twice as much steam as their conventional counterparts. Her name was whispered with pride along the docks, a name that would, in time, become synonymous with an unparalleled tragedy. For 2 years, she plied the waters of the mighty Mississippi, a regular fixture between St. Louis and New Orleans. Often commissioned to ferry troops during the tumultuous American Civil War. Her registered tonnage was 1,719 tons, and her normal complement of crew stood at 85 souls. She was designed to carry a comfortable 376 passengers. But as we often find in life, what is designed for comfort can, in the face of circumstance and ambition, be stretched to the breaking point. Fast forward to April of 1865. The war, which had torn the nation asunder, was finally drawing to a close. A sense of relief, albeit a somber one, was beginning to spread across the land. Our steamboat, under the command of her captain, a man from St. Louis, was on her way to New Orleans. On April 15th, tied up in Cairo, Illinois, a chilling piece of news arrived. A shadow cast over the nascent peace. The nation's beloved leader had been struck down in Washington, D.C. The captain, eager to be the bearer of tidings, rushed south, knowing that telegraph lines to the Confederate States were largely severed. Upon reaching Vicksburg, Mississippi, an opportunity arose, seemingly too good to be true. A representative of the Union quartermaster approached the captain with a proposal. Thousands of recently released Union prisoners of war, held in notorious Confederate camps, were awaiting transport north. The government would pay handsomely for each man carried. The captain, needing money, readily agreed to a deal that promised a full load of 1,000 prisoners, if he would offer a certain consideration to the quartermaster in return. The steamboat continued to New Orleans, spreading the grim news of the leader's assassination. On her return journey, just hours south of Vicksburg, a problem emerged. One of her 4 boilers sprang a leak. The vessel limped back to Vicksburg, under reduced pressure, for repairs and to pick up her promised cargo of prisoners. A mechanic was called in to fix the leaky boiler. His professional assessment? Cut out the ruptured seam and replace it. But such a repair would take days, and time, in this lucrative venture, was money. The prisoners, so close to freedom, would be sent home on other boats. So the captain and his chief engineer convinced the mechanic to perform a temporary fix. Hammer back the bulging plate, and rivet a patch of lesser thickness over the seam. What should have taken days, took but 1. And as these hasty repairs were made, the prisoners, thousands of them, many weakened by their incarceration, were brought aboard. The numbers swelled. The initial estimate of 1,000 prisoners quickly escalated. A mix-up in the parole camp records, and perhaps a suspicion of bribery from other captains, led the Union officer in charge of loading to put every man at the parole camp on or steamboat, believing the total to be less than 1,500. Remember that legal capacity? 376 passengers? By the time she pulled away from Vicksburg on the night of April 24th, she was dangerously, criminally overcrowded. She carried 1,950 paroled prisoners, 22 guards, 70 fare-paying cabin passengers, and a regular crew of 85, for a grand total of 2,127 souls. The decks groaned, creaked, and sagged under the weight, needing to be shored up with heavy wooden beams. For 2 agonizing days, she struggled upstream, fighting against one of the worst spring floods in the river's history. The river, swollen and powerful, extended 3 miles wide in some places. On April 26th, she stopped at Helena, Arkansas, where a photographer captured a haunting image of the grossly overcrowded vessel. Then, around 7 p.m., she arrived in Memphis, Tennessee, and began unloading 120 tons of sugar. At near midnight, she left Memphis, then went a short distance upriver to take on a fresh load of coal. Around 1 a.m., she resumed her northward journey. It was around 2 a.m. on April 27, 1865. The steamboat was about 7 miles north of Memphis. Suddenly, and with unimaginable violence, the unthinkable happened. One boiler exploded, followed a split second later by 2 more. The massive steam explosion erupted from the top rear of the boilers, tearing through the crowded decks above and utterly destroying the pilot house. The vessel, now a drifting, burning hulk, was without a pilot to steer her. The explosion flung some passengers into the icy water and ripped a gaping 25 to 30 feet hole in her. Her twin smokestacks toppled. One fell back into the blasted hole, the other crashed forward onto the crowded upper deck, striking the steamboat's bell as it fell. The forward part of the upper deck collapsed onto the middle deck, trapping and killing many in the wreckage. Fire, fueled by lightweight wood and oil-based paint, consumed what remained of the superstructure. Survivors, weakened by their ordeal, panicked, racing for the water, but many, lacking strength, clung to each other, going down in groups. Rescue efforts were swift. A southbound steamer arrived within half an hour, pulling scores of survivors from the water. Downriver, near the Memphis waterfront, calls for help were heard, and crews from docked steamboats and warships immediately set about rescuing survivors. Other vessels joined the rescue. Those who survived the initial blast faced a horrific choice: the icy spring waters of the Mississippi or the inferno of the burning boat. Many succumbed to drowning or hypothermia. Bodies were found for months downstream, some as far as Vicksburg. Many were never recovered. Most of the steamboat's officers, including her captain, perished. The exact death toll remains uncertain, but estimates range from 1,169 to over 1,800, making it the deadliest maritime disaster in United States history, a tragedy that eclipsed even the sinking of the Titanic. Why did it happen? The official inquiry pointed to the mismanagement of water levels in the boilers, exacerbated by the severe overcrowding and the top-heavy nature of the vessel. As she listed from side to side, water would run out of the highest boiler, causing hot spots. When the boat tipped the other way, water rushing back into the empty superheated boiler would flash instantly to steam, creating a sudden, catastrophic surge in pressure. This, combined with low water levels and the faulty repair made days earlier, sealed her fate. Further investigation cited the brittle metal used in the boilers, the sediment-laden river water that clogged the flues, and the design of the boilers themselves as contributing factors. The captain, who desperately needed money and made that fateful deal, was James Cass Mason. The chief quartermaster who offered him the illicit proposal was Reuben Hatch. The Union officer who, due to a mix-up, and perhaps his own suspicions, ordered every man from the parole camp onto the already damaged vessel, was George Augustus Williams. The disaster was, for a time, overshadowed by the events surrounding the end of the Civil War, including the killing of President Abraham Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth, just the day before. Despite the immense loss of life, no one was ever truly held accountable. Captain Frederick Speed, a Union officer charged with overcrowding, had his guilty verdict overturned because he hadn't personally loaded the soldiers. Captain Williams, a regular Army officer, was protected by the military. Captain Hatch resigned from service to avoid a court-martial and disappeared. And Captain Mason, the man ultimately responsible for the overloading and the faulty repairs, perished in the very disaster he inadvertently created. For years, alternative theories for the Sultana explosion circulated. In 1888, a St. Louis resident claimed that his former business partner, Robert Loudon, a former Confederate agent and saboteur, confessed to having sabotaged the Sultana using a coal torpedo. A piece of what appeared to be an artillery shell was reportedly recovered from the wreck, lending some credence to this claim. However, this theory is controversial, with most scholars supporting the official explanation, noting the explosion's location at the top rear of the boilers, far from where a coal torpedo in the firebox would detonate. The inventor of the coal torpedo, Thomas Edgeworth Courtney, also denied its use in the Sultana disaster. Another claim, from 1886, suggested that a former huzzaner and passenger on the steamboat, Second Lieutenant James Worthington Barrett, caused the explosion. However, no apparent motive for him to blow up the boat while he was on board has ever been established. In 1903, a story emerged that the Sultana was sabotaged by a Tennessee farmer who lived along the river and cut wood for steamboats. After some Union gunboats took his wood without paying, he supposedly hollowed out a log, filled it with gunpowder, and left it on his woodpile, where it was mistakenly taken by the Sultana. This theory, however, is quickly dismissed, as the Sultana was a coal-burning boat, not a wood-burning one. An investigation in 2014 further disputed sabotage theories and focused on the extreme overcrowding. It largely blamed Quartermaster Captain Reuben Benton Hatch, highlighting his history of corruption and incompetence, sustained by political connections, including being the younger brother of a close friend and advisor to President Lincoln. Despite court-martial charges, Hatch had managed to secure letters of recommendation from high-ranking officials, even President Lincoln and General Ulysses S. Grant. After the disaster, he refused to appear at trial and avoided justice due to his powerful patrons. And that is a story you likely never heard before.